Good morning, and thank you for joining us today. I'm Tawny Anderson from Wellington High School.
And I am Marie-Amalie Farris, and we are going to walk you through how we have reimagined assessment and learning this year. We tend to focus our planning and teaching and delivery of instruction through the lens of identity, memory, legacy, all to promote social justice and individual advocacy.
So, as we look at how we can reimagine both assessment and learning, we have to look at several components. What is the difference between assessment for mastery and assessment for memorization and performance? We need to look at what we want students to know and how can our students show mastery other than the traditional ABCD or E, all of the above, true or false. There's so much more to assessing a student's learning than how well they do on a multiple choice test or true-false quiz.
We understand the importance of standardized testing, and we're not here to knock that. We're here to look at how we can help our students truly learn and show how smart they are and what kind of smart they are with this, rather than just bubbling or clicking through something, to where they can take pride and ownership in their own education.
Traditionally, these tests have been given and they benefit some students, but they leave so many of our other students behind. So often we've all heard, oh yeah, just another one of those tests to show me how stupid I am. Miss, I'm not stupid, but these tests, I just can't do them. They're just not for me. So that started us on a different way to assess the students' actual progress in a way that didn't diminish them and focused on their skills and their ability to truly show you what they have learned. Because they're right. These tests don't work for them. However, the way we've done it, it's creating work for teachers, but it's good work.
And it took a little while to get the hang of it, but we're glad we persevered with it, and our students are glad. Between the two of us, we teach all ranges of academic levels, and we found ways to make this work across the board, where it's not just one particular level or one particular class, whether it's a core or an elective, but a way to make it work throughout, at least for us and for our kiddos.
We found that this works for students on access points, inclusion classes with co-teachers, as well as honors courses, and
even in our ACE history classes. We found a way, and the students have really enjoyed it. At the end of the year, well, I know we still have another week or so to go as we're filming this, but they talked about how meaningful it was, and that when it came down to their exam, this type of learning and assessment, they said, Miss, that really helped more than some of the reading quizzes that we had. We were able to pull back and thought about what we had done with this, and boom, I knew the answer, and I just started writing even more. And that was a good feeling. Well, for me to see that it worked, but to see the pride on the students' faces as we were having this discussion. So hopefully this will help you as well, and you'll have those wonderful moments, because there were a couple of days we weren't sure we were going to get there to this, but we persevered. And we realized, as we're struggling sometimes with this, how to design something and for students to find meaning and get past their fear of what if it's not perfect, that it's a growing process. And we learned, I think, as much from them as I think they learned from the content as well. Yeah. We've done all of this through looking at our standards, planning out what we needed to do to meet the standard, how we wanted to reach the students, and then how to assess, have they mastered that standard? Do they know at the end of the day what the Department of Education says they need to know?
So, standards based, I cannot stress strongly enough for your protection and your sanity, standards based. Make sure that you're very clear on the standards you're using as you plan this, as you deliver the information and work with the students for them to comprehend it and then to apply it. Because if we fail on any of these, the assessment, it's going to be that same old mind-numbing, soul-sucking experience that we all hate.
I think as we learn through this, they have to know it. With what we've done, there's no way of faking it till you make it. You either have it or you don't. It's not that you're simply a good test taker. You know your stuff.
One of my students actually said to me this year, Miss, you're really kind of diabolical. I was thrilled. That was more than a 2-syllable word. Diabolical. Awesome. How so? Miss, you can't cheat on this. How long did it take you to come up with this? In that moment, I felt like a success.
So here is how we applied this to an ACE course. We were looking at the role and position of ex-slaves during Reconstruction. And I'm using the terminology from our ACE syllabus and from several of the questions they've asked in the past from this. And one of my students, very artistically inclined, asked for, instead of doing something electronic, because we are in this hybrid learning this year of everything, can I just do something and attach it to a classroom, to the post if I scan it? Like, sure, let's see what we have. Because I wanted the students to understand what really was happening. Letter of the law versus intent versus application. The legal, political, social, and economic changes that persons of color were experiencing during this time frame, the gamut of emotions. And I asked her to research, to look at both what was in our text, what was in our supplemental readings, with documentaries, and with conversations we were having in class. I don't think I was quite prepared for this.
Do you want to tell them what ACE is?
I think we're good. Oh, I didn't realize the font on this would be so small, but this is what she came up with. And she was talking about the joy and being able to be free and to be herself during this. But at the same time, even though she was gaining her identity, the laws, the application, the interactions, she still felt nameless. She still felt like she was one of many, and that there was this hope and opportunity if people were willing and able to step into that, versus the fear and the anger and the unknown. And she talked about looking at different mediums with her painting and how she brought in her art background, that she liked this particular medium because it worked and she could build and she could layer. And thinking about the different stories and the narratives that she read as she put this together, coming up with it. I will try by the end of the presentation to figure out how to get the words. Like I said, I thought it was going to be bigger, but maybe, this might work. If you could hit pause for a moment and then zoom in, you might be able to see it. That might be the quickest way to do that. And again, I apologize for the words. It looked much better on the big smart screen putting this together.
It's amazing the difference between the whiteboard and an 18-inch monitor.
Yeah. This is a project we've used in all levels, but this year you took it one step further with this.
I have this very deep attachment to Tupac Shakur. And I have for years been so totally drawn in by the depth of his intellect and of his expression. Many people hear that name and they simply want to write him off as just another gangbanger rapper, dead too soon. But comparing him with Maya Angelou, and where they both have works that are so similar, the students get a big kick. They're shocked at first. Miss, Maya and Tupac? Oh, yeah. She kind of mentored him. Well, how do we know that? Well, I've told you that, so now maybe you'd want to take a few minutes to use those cell phones that you so want to sneak into class and you think I'm not seeing, and Google that. See what you can find and tell me about it. We've learned very quickly that lectures, come on, we don't like putting them together. We don't like hearing them as adults. We're all in that moment of lecture, thrown back to the Peanuts cartoons. God bless you, Charles Schulz. Wah, 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 wah. Why? Why do that to ourselves? Why do it to the students that we care so much about? So, as we move through an exercise that we put together for Still I Rise, through the viewpoints of both Maya Angelou and Tupac Shakur.
We had mentioned know your standards, look at your standards, be ready to show how your standards connect to the exercise. As long as you are standard-based, we have learned we're covered. And it's very clearly showing at the end, what are students showing mastery for? What are they learning? What is the goal set forth by this? We had looked at different things and looking at different art mediums, especially as we are more and more depending on our one-to-one devices, and seeing how we can take different individuals and look at them side by side. I fell in love with this poster series, and it was kind of like, okay, this is great. We like her poetry. We like this with Tupac. How do we blend it all together? So this was one of those inspiration pieces that actually started the student project. But really and truly, with what she says, I've learned that people will forget what you said, sometimes our lectures. People will forget what you did, but people will never forget how you made them feel. And having our students feel successful, that's what's driving this.
To feel competent, to feel that they have a place, they have a voice, that they're more than the number of X right or X wrong. Because the way we set these projects up, they can't be wrong. They're set up for success. They're set up to show the kids' genius, their creativity, and that creativity piece, guys, we all know it. So many of the tests have just absolutely sucked the creativity out of our kids to the point that they're paralyzed when they have the opportunity to be creative. And this is something that has been driven home to us even more over the last year as we struggle to do this digitally.
And one thing with this, it's bringing it back to community and community learning from the interactions with each other and the progress checks with this and getting feedback, whether it's from their teacher or from their peers or through their class, making this community learning experience. Because you can do things. That's awesome. But if you can explain the how and the why, then you really know it. So sometimes at first I think the biggest challenge was, well, how do we do this? We don't have the creativity. We may not have the skill. But then it became, do I have enough content? Wait, I now have too much content in this. How do I learn to pull out what's most important? At the end of the day, there's so many awesome things, but you said that it has to, I have to have the 5 most important things, but there are like 23 things that are so amazing. How do I do it? And that became the next step, the next part of the conversation. But I think I'm jumping ahead, aren't I?
A little bit, but
Okay.
that's okay.
So we know that there are many different mediums. Some students do like posters, some like, well, I was about to say some like writing an essay, but I don't know that that's fully the case. But looking at a video version of a poem or of a story versus the artist's voice. So we're going to take you through what we prepped and showed the kids with this first.
This addresses all styles of learning. We start with the visual learners, the auditory learners, and then we come to the kinesthetic learners. So the students have the opportunity to have the material in multiple formats, and they don't even realize that this is what's happening.
So to help with the streaming, we're going to turn our cameras off while the video is going, and then we'll be back with you. But please enjoy.
Writes me down in history with your bitter twisted lines. You may trod me in the very dirt, but still in dust. Does my assassinate affect you? Why do you beset the truth? Just because I walk as if oil wells, something in my bed. Just like suns and like moons, with the certainty of times, just like hope springing still. Did you want to see me broken? Bowed head and lowered eye, shoulders falling down my teardrops, weeping by my soul so fast. Does my sassiness upset you? Don't take it so hard, just as I laugh, as if I had gold digging in my own back. You can shoot me with your words, you can cut me with your lies, you can kill me with your hate, but just does my sexiness offend you? Does it come as a surprise? It's just meanings, the meeting of the eyes. Out of the huts of history's shame, up from a past rooted in pain, a black ocean leaping and wild, welling and swelling, in the leaving behind nights of terror and fear into a daybreak miraculously clear, bringing the gifts that my ancestors gave. I am hope and the dreams of the sea. What immediate results you hope to achieve? We had to sing
Super. Right. It's,
Hang on just a second. I think I closed out our presentation by mistake. But one thing we ask with our students with that, after that first little bit, what did you notice? What stood out to you? And sometimes that's a very quick conversation, and other times it's we're there for a while. And that's okay. That is part of this, and knowing that it's going to take a moment.
Because with this, we talk about how they felt when they watched this, and then what they thought when they watched this, forcing them to break apart the difference between what's going on in their head as opposed to what's going on in their heart. We talked to them about what made the biggest impact with this, because the students inevitably tell us how powerful this is. So as we have looked at it, okay, so what did you like best? What built this connection within you? And they will talk about, oh, the speeches, the music. And then others will say, no, it was the pictures. And then others, because they can also open a window that has the poem itself, so they can read it as this happens. They start to talk about how each of these items intensifies the effect of the poem.
And then just to help, because now you might have a visual, or you might want to create your own, just hearing the poem in and of itself without other visuals, just like you're sitting there listening to Maya herself share this with you one on one.
So by comparison and contrast, now we show this.
Everyone in the world has gone to bed one night or another with fear or pain or loss or disappointment. And yet each of us has awakened, arisen, somehow made our ablution, seen other human beings, and said, "Morning, how are you? Fine, thanks, and you." It's amazing. Wherever that abides in the human being, there is the nobleness of the human spirit, despite it all. Black and white, Asian, Spanish, Native American, pretty, plain, thin, fat, vowed or celibate, we rise. You may write me down in history with your bitter, twisted lies. You may trod me in the very dirt, but still like dust, I rise. Does my sassiness upset you? Why are you beset with gloom? Just because I walk as if I have oil wells pumping in my living room. Just like suns and like moons, with the certainty of tides, just like hope springing high, still I rise. Did you want to see me broken? Bowed head and lowered eyes, shoulders falling down like teardrops, weakened by my soulful cries. Does my sassiness upset you? Don't take it so hard just because I laugh. As if I have gold mines digging in my own backyard. You can shoot me with your words. You can cut me with your lies. You can kill me with your hatefulness. But just like life, I rise. Does my sexiness offend you? Oh, does it come as a surprise that I dance? as if I have diamonds at the meeting of my thighs. Out of the huts of history's shame I rise. Up from a past rooted in pain I rise. A black ocean leaping and wide, welling and swelling, I bear in the tide. Leaving behind nights of terror and fear, I rise. Into a daybreak miraculously clear, I rise. Bringing the gifts that my ancestors gave. I am the hope and the dream of the slave. And so, naturally, there I go rising.
The same poem. Very different
Deliveries.
very different effects, ways to process, and then bringing back the discussion. What do you notice? Which stands out to you? And then begins the comparison of the two. Exact same words, same voice saying them in both of them. But what is it? What stands out? And what is ultimately the central message? Is there a different message from one with images versus the ones with words, just the words? Where do you go? And the conversation, it's one of these things I wish I could tell you just kind of what to expect. But between us, that's 12 classes this year, and no two classes were the same. Even the same prep, no two classes had the same conversation. So that's the other part of this, I think, is being willing and able to understand that you're going to have this conversation, but you don't know where it's going to go or where the kids are going to lead it. And that's when part of it comes into stepping back and letting the kids step up. Some will rise in as leaders, others will pitch in, and sometimes you'll see a kid or hear a kid, because we've all had little circles on our screen with the initial in them, that you've never heard the voice the entire time this year, and all of a sudden they just start talking and have meaningful things to say. You're just, at least for me, I don't know about for you, I just sat there in silence for a few moments. I'm glad they taught us that pause in teaching, because I needed it. It was just so profound by letting them take control of the conversation. What stands out, how are they alike, and just being prepared to be on for the ride.
And another part of this, with as much effort and money as the state and the district has put in to social and emotional learning, that how did you feel? How did you feel from each of these poems? The students were better able to describe their own, what they got from this, the true effect from this, being able to explain, when I saw this, I felt. When I heard that, I thought. And being able to integrate both the emotion and the thought it's been incredible watching these kids take total responsibility for their own learning, for what they're taking away from it. Talking about the words and hearing them say something to the effect of, well, how would it have been different if she had used this word, or if she had used that word? The replacement of those words. I mean, this is high level things for many students who are level 1 and 2 readers, students who really can't write well, students that can't, at the beginning of the year, write a complete grammatically correct sentence. And when they move into that project base, this starts to happen.
Again, I really should have thought about how that was going to look. I do apologize with that. But you can see in the background where we had provided a copy of the poem for the students. And we included a little bit of the guidance of if you had needed to start the conversation with the students. This is what we had prepared for it, but students beat us to it. The students didn't need us to lead them into that. And what we were prepared for, because we know who we are. We have that reputation, which I'm not sure is a good thing or a bad thing, but that's beside the point, for the students to know that they could have the conversations that matter, the conversations that are dealing with present day issues and how it affects them on a personal level, in a societal level. They may not be able to talk about fully in the academic language of cause, course, and consequence, but they are able to discuss the reality to them. And if it matters to them, it matters. And finding a way then to help establish it back to the standard. And this does. I mean, it does beautifully with the intent of this.
We've learned that our students taking world history saw those images from world history, and they connected to that. The students taking U.S. history saw images from that, and they connected that. So that's something we knew, that when it came time to take those high value traditional tests, they were going to remember these things.
So then,
got to bring my man Tupac here. I mean, what is this without Tupac and Still I Rise? So with this then begins our comparison and contrast of style, of delivery,
of authors.
of author's point of view.
I think the biggest challenge of this was finding the clean version.
Yeah, none of us want to get fired because of F-bombs.
Lord, ask me down here. Fuck that. As long as you know, in search of a paradise Thursday. Trees and trees. Got the things that you the only place to go. The only place to learn. Trying to make the best of this wish. My life story. Ain't no glory in pain. A story. Can't quite live this life. It's a time, long somebody me, I'm dreaming. I started as a seed, swimming upstream, planning in the womb, I swinging on the top of my pops. My mama screaming, stop from a single drop. This is what they got, not to respect my people's woman. My mama was and abuse, even at the low seat. I can see his plan, stranded on welfare, another broken family. Besides, product of the seed, patch, mama got pregnant. The pop got a piece of that was the end. Nobody takes pistol in my hand. Without me, and I survived. Got me asking white Jesus whether never die. In the long gang seats in the dark clouds of the projects. Ain't no caution. No sunny days, then we only play sometimes. Everybody sleeping. My window up to the streets and get some people knocking on the door. Oh, my this is gone. 19, I'm trying to hustle on my own. Almost where everybody in the house trying to slay. Just rather go to college, but this is where it can't stop. Wrong, cause it's so tone. Mr. Young, we can buy rocks, pops over Herod Home. And that's my man, he's a man. He's like, time to meet up in the cemetery in the snow down. Right here, everywhere I go, how that is. It's real deep. When my fly till they kill me, I can fit your feel me. I was Not to make it what I did, but tribulations never get a piece till I ride. So it's always running your place with place. Get always up and through like you. They secrets are all prepare me for the worst. So like the lad is full of cabbage, all like this in the hurt. But now I know it's a scene, so like triple beans and then bro. Not a piggy when he got the loop popping out. I trying to see my block hot. Struggle with searching pussies and why not? Show what I made up was waste on the wild block. Cancel ad with me, turn to the streets, stop catching back. Make a gadget bust fast, that'll make me mad. I'm just like, my homie on the corner with his cat up. Tell us they fucking something to life. Be don't need no we all up. He trying to rise up and we just go, don't. I get the scripts where the beans get cold. Until I ride down flow, cows go. Whenever we come around, I'm running down. Touching the town, I'm a stop and ducking the sound. I used to hustle with my mom since the came. My homie I'm doing time from the drug game. Stolen cars, 4 scars, one outlaw. Behind bars, go to sleep. Stars, bring up the dog. So strap on the front block line. Only 10 on the dog. And 96, my boss, my plastic cash, my plastic. No faces for open cat, still in your cat. Your cat was able to have pistol practice. I said my mistress do your match. Leaving holes in your body like a cat. While me and my crew be popping will seize the topic. Seems in my scenes popping. Then it gets clean to pick up. Actually, softer than the sticker. Let's go to wars. Go quicker. And still I run. Still I run. Still I run. Still I run. Don't want you to cry. Don't want you to cry.
So with this, we talked about profane language. Why does profane language exist? What is the purpose of this? Does profane language have a purpose? If so, what is it? And the kids soared with this. They identified the fact, well, sometimes you use it to push people away. Sometimes you use it because things are just so bad that when you use other language, it diminishes the pain, it diminishes the struggle. And understanding the use of that is just unbelievable. So we talked about how the world sees us, how we see us. Are we wholly visible? Are we partially visible? What do we do to make ourselves visible or invisible? Through language, through choices, behaviors. And then we ask students to find significant quotes through their own research from both Maya Angelou and from Tupac. And then
to find the one or the individual or the piece of artistry that they identified most with. And then back to that poster that kind of started everything, that split face where you have the artist on one side with that quote you found, still with the idea, still I rise. And then a quote to represent you and how you can overcome things. Because think about this past year, what each of us as individuals, as family members, as employees, as members of communities, however you are connected, what we have overcome individually and collectively, what that was. And this was one student's representation of that?
We asked them, they could either compare Tupac and Maya with half a face each, or if they wanted to, they could put themselves in there with one of the individuals. And this gave them the opportunity for more computer skills. We're dealing with significant efforts from research and application of what they found and how it all works with these 2 points. Now, we'll tell you, this isn't going to happen in one class period. This will take several class periods.
It took us about 3 blocks between the preview, the setup, the conversations, the research, the finished product, and the presentations. But the skills that were with that, between the technology, the research, the writing portion of it, and back to so many of our students coming in this year not able to write a complete sentence, that took quite a bit. And then moving into one of your favorite topics,
the Black Arts Movement and the assessment from that. So Black Arts Movement works obviously both for African American history as well as hip hop, because hip hop has its roots way back in so many different movements within our historic past here. So as we've looked at this, how do we want to assess this? And it always comes back to student initiative, student research, student application, to developing that connection and relevance. And
here is some of what our kids came up with. I'm going to take you through one of the kids' presentations just by clicking through and then whatever you want to add.
So we ask them to choose one aspect of the Black Arts Movement and to develop a way of presenting this to someone that had no clue what this movement was about. So in other words, they're having to come up with a complete, well, basically, they're having to come up with the lecture that I might have given.
The history and the background and the recognition of what it was, bringing that in. And of course, we have a little 4-legged helper wanting to assist us with things. And then finding artwork that stood out and was meaningful to the student from this topic.
So finding a visual to illustrate it, finding a poem, a song, a painting, whatever medium they chose. Finding one person that they found significant from this movement, from the genre that they chose.
And then the background of this individual, who the person was, what the person did, why the person was important, and how this person was significant to the movement. I mean, that's quite a bit, but limiting it to a small amount of text where it's not just, I'm going to write down everything I possibly can find from anything I Google and throwing it on there. So reinforcing those writing skills. And then just taking us through that person's work. So something that stood out, and then focusing in on a person and then that person's role. But one thing we've learned with things this year is students need help how to cite information, or that they need to give credit where credit's due. And that was something I think that came as a surprise to both of us, that wasn't the established norm. So after the first project, it's like, okay, we need to set up a framework on this is what we need to include. So instead of, just getting frustrated and freaking out, okay, guys, so when we do this, this is something we need to include. So we went back, spent time how to cite things, and then walked the kids through it, and then had them resubmit a biography. So something we didn't think we would necessarily need to front load. It was, okay, didn't quite work the way we had in mind. Let's go back and fix that now.
And surprisingly, our highest level students struggled with this as well.
And then,
So we did a deep dive into Henrietta Locke's.
we're reading it in English, reading the book.
They're reading the book in English and talking about, I'm sorry, the disparity in medical,
Ethics.
Medical ethics, how things have changed or not changed. Are we in control of our own bodies? How do we trust those who have taken an oath to do no harm? How do we trust that they will do what's best for us instead of what might benefit them most financially? So we looked at this historically. We looked at this in terms of the characters and how they felt, the impact that all of these issues had on them, how it either built trust or destroyed it. We talked about technology. Well, the students talked about, I just kind of sat back and let it happen. The students talked about technology outpacing law and ethics. So with this, we had them choose the character that most impacted them, the character whose story most impacted them, and to create a project based on this.
So part of it was creating the framework, a certain slide minimum, and what needed to be included, but how they went about doing that, they had the freedom to do.
One student preferred to put this in a visual form. They were overwhelmed by the emotion of it and asked, well, can I do this through my art? Absolutely, you can. Did it differ from what I had in mind when I designed the project? Absolutely. The student then talked about what the colors meant, the colors they chose, the images that they put into this.
And part of this with education is being willing to adapt to what the student is able to do successfully. Like you said, you had one thing imagined, but if you had said, nope, you have to stick with this, look what you would have missed out on.
Look what the student would have missed out on.
Sometimes it's having to let go of, well, it has to be all the same way and everybody has to have it the same. But we and our kids are not one size fits all with learning and application. But at the end of the day, she had everything. It just was a little different than you had originally imagined.
Oh, yeah.
So she reimagined it for you.
So we haven't given you step by step how to do this because each of you is going to have a different end goal in mind.
However, if you want to reach out,
if you want to reach out, absolutely. We can show you more in depth of what we've done, how we set it up. We wanted to give the students always as much personal responsibility as possible. And what we discovered is we have to have guidance through this. So one day in class, okay, today this is what you're going to do. You're going to gather your research, and we will provide either a Google slide or a Google document for them to put their research on, just their notes. And we ask them to begin building their works cited page, their bibliography, from the beginning, to cut and paste the information from the websites that they visit onto that slide or that document so they can go back and retrieve it. We have them research the different individuals from the book. And ultimately, we do show the film. I think it's an HBO.
Maybe I don't remember.
Piece. It's not expensive to be able to access this. We have them tell us which one of these individuals, their story, impacted you the most. How would you create a tribute to that person? So a biographical piece, legacy, how they are remembered if they've passed, how they have impacted current issues if they have or have not. And then we just kind of get out of the way and let this happen. So we can go through at any time and look onto those Google Slides or documents to see what they're putting on there. If there's nothing happening, then, wait a minute, my friend, nothing seems to be going on. Why not? What you're stuck? What's got you stuck?
I just kind of go through.
This was one that we did on Kwanzaa. Again, how do you explain Kwanzaa to someone that's never heard of it, never experienced it?
This is what some of the kids came up with.
So you had to, your project, however you did this, had to give the name, the symbol, and an explanation of why.
An artistic version, you see
A poem,
a board. This board was absolutely stunning. And she was the leader of our Black Student Union this year. And she wanted to be able to have something to where, hopefully, if things are more in person next year, that BSU will be able to use this with Kwanzaa, with some of their meetings. So she had a multi-purpose with that one. And then when you did the Underground Railroad through the quilts,
we looked for hidden messages. We looked at some documentaries. There are some excellent ones there. You probably have ones that you really love. If not, reach out. We'll share those with you. But we wanted them to show us those coded messages, either in the quilts or in the songs of that time.
Here are some of the student samples with this. And it was really fascinating to see which stood out to the students between colors or patterns and the different ways. Most, I think all of them, because this was still in the early part of the year. It was still, about October?
Yeah.
And they were still feeling it in and just like, okay, a slides presentation is the safest way to go. So we're going to go with that.
And then I had one student that said, Miss, could I sing a song about this? Sure. What I wasn't prepared for was the students sang a song to Swing Low, Sweet Chariot. And in that song, they told how to get from their house to school. I wasn't recording it. I wished I had. The student didn't want it recorded, but it literally set me back in my chair. Am I going, oh my God? This is a sophomore who has 3 credits and below, well below 0.0 GPA. Wow.
I'm trying to help with making judgments and supporting the judgment. It doesn't matter which judgment or which view you take as long as you're supporting it. So it's building in and using history to support writing standards with this. This is another one. I think this one is based off of Hamilton, maybe? No, this was off the race science. We also did it with Hamilton. Is to, if you're not familiar with race science, it is some readings from Facing History and Ourselves and how race began to be classified in the original science or pseudoscience that came about during this time frame that set different aspects up. So the students all had the same articles, but then they had to select a person from this, whether it was one of the scientists, one of the politicians of the time, and then looking at, did I misspell it? Okay, I apologize for the misspelling on the other one, but you know, it happens. And where they went with this. So looking at what made this person a hero, what evidence was there from the reading and from additional research from that. And then what made the person a villain with this. And I loved how the student used very small images with it, but the shading with it to tell more in case we couldn't quite figure it out where we were going with that. And then ultimately, on weighing out the evidence, what did the student find and how did the student come about with that?
So was this person a hero or a villain? And tell why. Now then, we chose scientists who either through faulty methods or incomplete methods had come up with some pretty damaging quote unquote scientific proof for superiority of one group and inferiority of another. Now, I don't know how that's going to play out next year. We're going to have to get some feedback and some advice on whether or not in the state of Florida we can still use something like this.
But perhaps with other readings, it's something that it can still go. And then bringing back into the students' research. And then once again, looking at another scientist from the series.
This particular scientist designed the experiment to prove preconceived ideas and set them up to where his thoughts could not be disproven. So students were able to see that he had not followed scientific method and the way in which experiments should be conducted.
So essentially, what did this year teach us? I think for me, it reinformed I truly love looking at my standards, knowing how to incorporate them, and then giving the students the background, providing students with a framework, and then letting them take ownership. Now, virtually, it was more difficult. There were days I wanted to give up and just go, let's go back to multiple choice. It's going to be quicker. It's going to be easier instead of trying to open 27 tabs to check and make sure each of them are working versus just walking around the classroom. But realizing that multiple choice, especially this year, it was so easy to cheat. I didn't know if they were actually learning it or getting it done. But the projects, they were worth the time. It was worth the additional time that it took this year digitally with all of the constraints of Wi-Fi and one-to-one and everything that happened, that what would have taken maybe 3 days in class was now taking 4 and 5. But the trade-off at the end of the year, the students could still tell me what they had learned at the beginning of the year, other than going, miss, that was a long time ago, and I have 6 other classes, and no. So I think it was well worth it. And I learned how to better phrase things, and that the first project has to be overly specific. They don't do well with loose frameworks initially because they're afraid of getting it wrong. And teaching them that failure, as long as you learn from it, it is part of the process and you really haven't failed.
It's a learning process. It's a lesson you learned. It's not a failure. Now, if you continue to do the same thing, then that's not a learning process anymore. Be prepared for the fact that you probably will need to develop graphic organizers to help the students with their original research, the initial research.
And brainstorming.
And that can be one of your grades for that week, because you have to have 2 significant, meaningful grades, not participation grades, for each week. So that could be one of your grades. Now you're going to have to open 30, 35, 40,
42,
however many students you have, and look at them. Yes, is it going to take you longer? Yeah, it will, but it's worth it. It's worth it. Initially, you will probably want to be very specific with a rubric. And once the students find that the rubric, we work on accuracy, visual appeal, creativity, and clarity. And explaining to them what visual appeal looks like. Fonts, colors. And sometimes we had one that turned in, they chose a black background with deep purple.
I'm sure it was pretty.
Text.
Couldn't read
It was beautiful. I didn't say anything. I didn't accuse the student of trying to blind me, or, a parent suggesting that a parent owned, a shop that made glasses, because I was clearly going to need them. So, I said, okay, when you're ready to present. And there was this horrified, miss, I think I will bleep the word up. I'm having trouble reading this. Okay, so what can you do to restore this where you can read it? It's very pretty. It is eye-catching. But it is difficult to read. So what can you do now? So we bring in the technology, highlighting this, changing the color on it, maybe choosing a different font.
And I think the other part with this is asking students what they want and what they need, with the disclaimer that at the end of the day, I'm going to do what I think is best to help you with your education, but if I can make your voice work with this and we can reach those standards, we'll consider it. It's being willing to do that and stepping away from that. I am the teacher. This is it. It's not going to change. And letting the students thrive that way.
Checking your final progress. You can do a separate grade even for their building their works cited page. You're creative people yourselves, or you wouldn't be teaching. So just know it's going to take you some work. But guess what? Once you've done that, you've got a project that you can reuse year to year. You can change it up slightly from one year to the next as you learn things or as you see students with different needs.
And I think one of the things that helps, and it goes back to what we learned, is sometimes it may not go as planned. And then when you're trying to troubleshoot something because technology and how you had it envisioned and how the application or the licensing agreement, the students can sometimes troubleshoot that for you. And it's like, well, miss, what if I did this instead? And the other kids are like, yeah, we can do this. Can we all do that? And they found a way to overcome something I didn't even know would be a problem with part of the technology, thinking that when we applied for the school license, it went through, not realizing that you had to separately register each student, and then it took 2 weeks, and it's like, but we have this now, and just those little things. So the kids are phenomenal with this.
They are. I mean, when we couldn't find a workaround, man, they did. They were awesome with this. And when we came to a question, is this something that we can professionally and ethically, do you think this is a way we can go with that? Anytime there was a doubt, Mr. Knowles, Ms. Jefferson, they were right there with guidance, suggestions.
So we have phenomenal district support. So use them. Absolutely. Sorry, guys, in case we just blew up your mailbox with everybody, but you're worth it. So if you have any questions or you would like to meet at some point to help take something that you want or to look at how to include standards more into this and how students can take a more active role, we're happy to work with you and to meet up with you. It'll probably be through a Google Meet to do that. And thank you for
being here today.
with us. Take care.
Bye now.
Hang on.